Hello, this is Freethought Forum. It's a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm David.
Hi, and I'm Joe Barnhart. Welcome.
We want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Right here in East Tennessee, you can find people, free-thinking atheists and agnostics. This is a show for them and people committed to a life rooted in science and unfettered by supernatural beliefs.
Okay, and before we begin, let's mention our sponsors.
Yeah, we got the Atheist Society of Knoxville. They frequently have a fun meetup at a bar eatery. The weekly meetup is Tuesdays at 5:30 at a Flats and Taps. That's over on 7403 Kingston Pike in Knoxville. For details, just go to knoxvilleatheist.org, and when you get to the meetup, look for the silver jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright at the table. And as Matt Delahunty and the Atheist Experience says, everyone is welcome to our happy hour for food, drink, and conversation. But if you plan to preach, provoke, or punch, please don't.
Want to be civilized, huh?
Right, absolutely.
Thank you. Well, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have several monthly meetings, and they have a website. It's rationalist.org. And you can get details on that, rationalist.org. The first and third Sunday morning of the month have lectures and discussions, and the second Sunday, the Skeptics Book Club. On the fourth Sunday, mix it up, sometimes with potluck get-together and sometimes with a reflection meeting at homes.
Yeah, and later in the show, we'll give you some of our websites and to visit for additional details, and that'll include times and locations. Okay, so let's see.
So we better get to the program then, huh?
Right. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about
sensitivity and calm, rational inquiry. And maybe we can begin with the notion of empathy.
Right.
As part of rational inquiry.
Yeah, and I think when you talk about sensitivity, you can't get into that without a sense of empathy as well.
That's a good point.
And so, like, if we're looking at it from like common usage of empathy, so when someone who's not looking at a definition in front of them, maybe they're thinking like to understand how someone feels, or to be able to say, man, I've been in that sort of scenario. That's really awful or good.
Then if you and I disagree, empathy means if I'm going to disagree with you, first of all, I need to understand your view and why it's meaningful to you.
Right.
That's what real empathy means, to get inside, and that's hard work, to get inside another person's frame of reference, to show why it's meaningful to that person. And that's why we're humanists. Because even when we disagree, we recognize each other as human.
Absolutely. And I think part of why it's difficult is, it's that sort of coming to that realization that you're talking to another entity that is having different experiences than you. And I think that ties into almost like this sort of, not ethnocentric, but the sort of perspective of everything that I experience is the way, sort of, the general is. Yeah. So I think that's a dangerous thing when you talk about that.
Yeah, that's living it with your own dreams.
Right. It's really important to break away from that, but I don't know if it's always the case.
Yeah, I remember my wife once said, "You're not the person I married." We were teasing each other. I said, "Well, would you?" I was about 50 then. I said, "Well, would you want to be married to a 20-year-old?" She said, "Well, no." So we enjoyed that.
Right, she doesn't want you to be, but she said,
well, we change and we develop.
Yeah, that's...
If we're lucky.
That's really interesting. I actually had a conversation sort of similar, not with a wife, but with some people at the school. Because right now we're in the summer sort of break, but I've got some people at Pellissippi I talk to about different philosophical topics. And one of the things that came up was the sort of self, and over time, you're constantly changing. So there's this sort of like evolving self. And I think that really ties into that.
Yeah. In fact, if you look at some of when you're my age, you look at some of my boyhood pictures, I said, is that me?
Right.
Because we do change in both some of our views, and we develop new friendship.
Yeah, I mean, in developing views, I mean, I think depending on how you're raised, like the idea of moving from a religious sort of view to a non-religious view.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, if you grow up with one religious view, you'll very likely modify it along the way.
Right.
And so that after 10 years, it may be significantly different from what you had and you may still use the same name, but you'll have so many different details that are different.
Absolutely.
And if you're not, if you're an atheist, you're going to, let's say we talked about this on the program once before, you could be a Stalinist and an atheist. Well, I don't think you are.
Right.
See, even atheism has various denominations and differences.
Right, yeah, because, it's like, it's always said it's a single view of a single topic. It doesn't really tie into a lot of other things.
Exactly.
And
the word atheism, the word "a" there means non, so that tells you more what you're not rather than what you are.
Absolutely. So that's a really important thing to clarify, just to get that out there.
Yeah. So I like the word naturalists. That we got a natural world and I'm part of it, rather than a supernatural world.
Right.
And that gives you some insight as to where you're going, and then. Some supernaturalists and some theists I know have a view of nature that's very similar to my view, so we can do a lot of work together, and then sometimes we can talk about ethics, and sometimes we disagree, but sometimes we agree. But then that's true with people who are naturalists, but they may have disagreements among themselves. That's how you grow and develop too, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's funny, it almost sounds exactly like the experience I had when you were describing earlier, this sort of the transition where you modify this religion as you go. I kind of dealt with that sort of thing for many years myself. So it's like as I learn things of science, I'm trying to make it conform to match what I know. So,
yeah, I had a teacher, for example, or several teachers, who were theists and evolutionists. And they had to deal with the theists who were anti-evolutionists.
Right.
So those theists were more in common with the naturalists in terms of science and ethics than they were with some of the evangelicals.
That's a tricky one to reconcile, though, I feel like. But I think is that the notion that at some point in evolution the soul just kind of gets interjected?
Well, the word soul, suke in Greek, that has all kinds of different versions.
Oh,
I mean, like you have a phrase, that's the soul of that argument. But what does that mean? You see, that's not something that's extracted from the argument. That means that's what's basic to the argument.
Right.
So that's a different use of the word soul.
So I guess that makes it even harder.
And even among theists, you have various difference of opinion as how they're using that word.
Yeah, I could definitely see that being that's one of those things you have to clarify first. You definitely want to know exactly what you're talking about when you go to define.
Well, we do the same with the notion of person. And we dealt with it on this program once on the abortion issue.
Okay.
Is a newborn fetus, just coming out, is that a person? It's a human being. It's human. It's not it's not a giraffe. It's a human.
Right.
But it takes a lot of time and development for some human being, newborn, to develop personhood, consciousness, conscience. A newborn does not have a conscience.
Right.
Does not have any opinions. Doesn't have a language.
Yeah, that's true.
A newborn is not being very rational because he's newborn or she's newborn.
Right.
And that takes time. And we aren't dealing with the abortion issue now. We're just trying to show that even the notion of personhood has to come with a lot of new input to make it a person.
Right, and then it really goes down to how we define personhood.
Exactly.
How bare bones do we need?
Yeah, and we don't refer to a dog as a person. I've got 2 dogs.
It depends on who you're talking to.
Well, most people don't, but we'd say they have personalities.
Right.
And very different personalities from each other.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't think of them as persons, and we don't give them the same rights, but some similar rights, more than you would, say, a twig on the ground. You don't. You could cut down a twig, but you just don't cut up a dog because they can feel pain.
Right. Yeah, that definitely goes into your more advanced biology. Well, I won't say more advanced, but a more complex, neurological system.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a nervous system capable of nociception. So when you get that pain experience, I think that ties right back into empathy.
That's exactly the pain thing, the feelings of pain and pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
That's basic.
Right.
I remember asking a preacher, I said, you think he was denouncing hedonism, and I understood why, because some people use the word hedonism to mean just outrageous pleasure. But he was denouncing pleasure, and I said, well, I suppose you could go to heaven, but you have no pleasure. Oh, he saw the point.
Right. I could that's a pretty good question, because, I mean,
yeah,
I don't know what kind of situation
he said, yeah, of course you have. I said, does that make you a hedonist? Well, of course it did, because the word hedonos is just a Greek word for pleasure, that's all.
Pleasurist. Interesting. Well, no, Joe, I know today you want to talk about sensitivity and rational inquiry.
Yeah, and the word pleasure leads into that, because other people we recognize have pain and pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And so sensitivity means to be aware, at least of that.
Right.
And then the title that we have is Sensitivity and Calm Rational Inquiry.
Okay.
So rational inquiry means you got to be sensitive not only to their feelings, but also what they say and what they mean, and that's the art of listening.
Right. So what's interesting about this is who all can do it and why. So we do it. We're Homo sapiens. We're very social species. And we use we use language along with body gestures and a lot of facial expressions.
Yeah.
But our closest relatives, if you think about chimpanzees, they also have this sort of body language, extreme facial expressions.
Oh, yeah.
They don't have the vocalization in the same way, but there's still a vocalization of sort of maybe not intent, but they carry a message. And you can see this sort of understanding of another individual in close relatives of ours. So it's interesting to me to think about the biological aspect of this sort of understanding of another. And
even dogs, if you have a dog you're close to in the family, they pick up on sensitivity, and you can pick up on their sensitivity, and they have certain sounds that indicates, that they feel left out or something.
Right. And speaking of dogs, that reminds me of a really interesting study where they were testing chimpanzees, and they would put a fruit or something that the chimpanzee would want under a container, and they do that sort of the trick where you have to pick under which cup the item is under.
Oh yeah.
And they would point at the cup, and interestingly enough, the chimpanzee didn't understand the pointing, but a dog understands the pointing, and that's that sort of coevolution over the past 10,000 years.
I like that coevolution. We kind of grow together.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we definitely relied on them as well as they relied on us.
But we've got 2 dogs and a cat, and I've been interested to notice you work with how the dog and the cat get along well together now. Now they didn't at first,
right?
But you just have to coach them and develop, and pretty soon a cat will come and jump in my lap, and the dog will come and stand beside me.
Well, you see, they can get along. So.
Yeah. They don't have any problem with that now.
But yeah, that's kind of what I thought about with that, and it's really your, like I said, your social species. So
that's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and I think that's you have to get along. So because you have to in order to survive, it sort of becomes like an essential trait. I would call it.
I think you're right. Yeah.
So it's really deep rooted into your genetics, just your physiology, your biology.
Yeah.
About understanding when you look
Body.
at someone.
Body language.
Right.
Yeah.
And kind of drawing from your own experiences to determine how they're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. This dog, one of the dogs, the finger pointing. They understand that.
Mm-hmm.
You know that.
I've not tested it, but I'm almost willing to bet that the cat doesn't.
Well, you know, I hadn't tried that with the cat, but yeah, you're probably right. That'd be an interesting test.
Yeah, and you know, cats kind of do what they want, anyways. But so like, I feel like I got sidetracked by cats a little bit, cats and dogs. I love talking about that sort of thing, though.
Yeah. But in some cases, sensitivity and what we call calm or rational inquiry. Now we're talking about human beings now.
Right.
Can help us come to terms with our past decisions, for example, and including our successes and our failures and our mistakes. Mm-hmm. Because if you're human, you're going to have a history of both.
Right.
And instead of using a judgmental tone to rush it, to draw conclusions for our friends, and with a judgmental tone, we learn to listen. That's what a counselor does, and all of us, in some respects, try to be counselors to each other.
Right.
To learn to listen, and that's an art.
Yeah, I want to say that no matter if you're at school, if you're at work, you typically find someone that you kind of talk about a subject. It doesn't have to be everything, but you find someone to kind of a middle ground to kind of converse about.
Yeah.
That's interesting to think about, and how relative it is to your day-to-day life.
Oh yeah. Well, we learn to draw conclusions for ourselves, and then we learn to relate to other people so that we don't draw conclusions for people. We respect them and the interaction to start drawing their own conclusions, and that's how we share information. And even when we disagree, a disagreement is very important, because that's partly how you learn. If I'm driving a car and I'm going the wrong direction, I'm glad my wife is disagreeing with me.
Right.
To remind me we were supposed to be going this way.
Yeah.
So that's why part of learning is listening. And that means trusting our own ability, what we hear, to think for ourselves, but at the same time to solicit others to help us in certain areas. And then one reason why we go to school is we know this is a certain area of learning we don't know much, and so we have to learn from somebody else. Right. Or if we go to, I call for an electrician, because I wouldn't dare do what I need to have done, because he knows his business and I don't.
Right, and you definitely know the consequences of trying to do that.
So we need rational thinking and amiability. And that is, so when you and I disagree, we can be amiable because I'm learning from you. Right. If you're correcting something, it's one thing for you to correct my mistakes, another thing to correct me. If I take it start personally, I'm not learning from you. But if you're just correcting my opinion or my view or something I did, that's not necessarily an attack on my personality.
Right.
In fact, if you give me a good critique, that may be a compliment. You're saying, Joe, you can handle it.
Right, but I think in that sort of sense, depending on the person, it may be something that ties into your sort of sense of self. And this is what I find a lot of times when I talk about people, or talk to people about things like the age of the Earth, or the species evolving. You know, these are simple scientific facts, but it's something that kind of contradicts something that they hold to their core about their sort of worldview.
Yeah, sure.
And then that one, when that happens, I think it's really easy to see it as an attack, sort of on you as a person. And that's sort of the message I get a lot of times. And that kind of ties back into that. I'm trying to understand their perspective on the situation. But it can be.
And so you can say, you might think somebody's view on a certain subject might be ridiculous. That doesn't mean you think the person is ridiculous, because he
Right.
might have some other view about another subject, and you're the one that needs to be corrected.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's
Yeah. And that's one thing that I definitely don't hold myself above. I mean, any of my views could be subject to question for sure.
sure. Certainly modification.
Right.
That's why we should, read books
Absolutely.
to learn more. And so rational thinking and listening to other people is part of our self-interest. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. For sure. I mean, before it became sort of this sort of cultural thing where you want to maintain good relationships between individuals. It was definitely about survival, and but those two things drive it, and it's very deep rooted into just like I said, the culture or the fabric of the culture now.
Sure.
It's just part of, interaction now.
Now, would you agree? You can make a judgment about a certain view without being judgmental of the person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because most of us don't like a put down.
Right, and I think we're getting a call. Let's see. Go ahead and slip over real quick.
We got a caller?
What's your name or a nickname that you can give us?
Hey, it's Charles from Central Illinois.
Well, how are you doing?
So far, so good. Today's concepts about rational inquiry and or blasphemy. You're talking about criticism and constructive and destructive criticism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the primary faults is in the past was just how many people were and were not literate, and how many people had access to what was or wasn't considered blasphemy. And with today's much larger base of people that are literate, it's very hard to hide the difference between constructive criticism and it being taken as blasphemy instead of being taken as what it's supposed to be.
Right, and I wonder how that ties into cultures that are still a verbal culture. I mean, where you don't really pass down traditions through written language. I wonder if you would notice a difference there. I wonder how they handle sort of this constructive criticism differently.
Now you would have to take up with the proper historians, but we do have some information on say English and so forth, in English society and European society for the longest time, when church and state were basically the same people, blasphemy was whatever the people that were powers that be wanted it to be.
Right.
And,
okay, let's see if we can you tell me what point he's making? Let's see if we can understand. What point is he making?
So with his is just right now about anything that wasn't in agreement with this sort of state/church was blasphemy. So if you're questioning anything that they've said, then you're being blasphemous. And the first thing that came to my mind was the Copernican revolution. I don't know why that was the first thing.
No, that's a good, yeah. Sometimes people understandably have a viewpoint and they see some other viewpoint that looks greatly different from theirs. Mm-hmm. They get very suspicious if they think it has moral implications for them. And so one of the things we wanted to show is, let's suppose you're an atheist. That doesn't tell you what your ethics is. You have to find out for the particular atheist what he holds to.
Yeah.
Because as we mentioned earlier in this, this month, Joseph Stalin was an atheist. I'm not Joseph Stalin type, but I know some Christians who hold to views that I compare to Joseph Stalin. The notion of hell, I think, is as abysmal and as evil as anything Joseph Stalin came up with. In fact, it's the same kind of a hostile aggression toward other people who don't agree with you.
Right.
And they, in effect, say the notion of hell says, if you don't agree with this, to hell with you. And they mean it literally.
Right. And it's sort of this fear tactic of keeping people in line and doing what you want them to do.
Now, we do have to say, to be honest, we teach our children there are some things, and teach ourselves to be afraid of. Don't play in the street where there's a lot of traffic.
Right.
Because it's, you should know there's some things to be afraid of. Mm-hmm. But the question is, what are those things? And don't just invent things just to make your program sell.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
we're talking about real things.
There's plenty of true things in the world that you need to be aware of and you need to understand. That way, I mean, I guess fear doesn't necessarily have to be a part of it, like it is with the, I think the hell mythos. So. But
we can show children pictures of people who lose their teeth because they didn't brush their teeth.
Right.
That can be vivid. And so that seems within the ball game, because that's not a real threat to a child, but it helps them to see there are consequences of behavior.
Right.
And so that's what I want to talk about. Rationality and amiability go together. Amiability means you just try to be kind and considerate of other people, even when we disagree. And by disagreeing, it may be a good way to learn from each other.
Right.
In fact, I have attended meetings where I present papers so that I can get criticism to improve the paper in my point of view.
Absolutely.
I mean, most academics circles, they do it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea of peer-reviewed journal, I think, is a perfect example of people looking for criticism.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
one of the factors that made the Copernicus revolution actually work was the invention of the printing press.
Oh, yeah.
Gutenberg's movable type printing press, as well as Galileo Galilei and his telescopes. Because between the two of them, you could actually do something that beforehand you couldn't. You could communicate a wider area than you ever could before, and B, you could go and look and see for yourself without having to just take the other person's word with it. You pointed out that the peer review is very, very important in the scientific rational worldview.
Sure.
And that's the great strength of the scientific and rational worldview, is that if you're wrong, and somebody points it out, you thank them. But if you're in an authoritarian regime, if you're wrong and they point it out to you, you get angry and you punish the person that has embarrassed you.
A good example of this, if you're driving and you're making a mistake and you're driving, you hope somebody's going to correct you, and in a hurry.
Right.
And you're being, I'm old enough to have been very grateful for people sitting beside me who say, well, did you see this? Or do you see this?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, and so in that sense, rational thinking and rational behavior and amiability can go together. That's a friendly thing.
Right.
To help somebody. And try to point out, we make judgments all the time, and that's different from being judgmental, which is a kind of an attitude of condescension.
Yeah.
And we don't want that, because we all know that ignorance is something all of us have in great proportions. In fact, sometimes such big proportions, we're ignorant of what the proportions are.
Right, and that's one of the biggest things that you learn going into researching or moving into the field of science. You learn, the first thing you learn is how much you don't know.
That's a humbling experience.
Oh, absolutely.
Religion and science both can help with humility in that respect.
Right, that's true.
So, go ahead.
My point is that, as you pointed out, people that are tolerant and willing to learn from each other have to contend with people that are not tolerant and be what I call egocentric. How dare you point me out to be wrong? I am the great one.
Well, usually, would you agree, people like that often are that way only in certain areas? And maybe all of us are in certain areas and don't know it until somebody points it out for us. In other words, we can be dogmatic and not know it.
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, from personal experience, that sort of thing would happen if I was certain about a position. And you will come across this a lot when you talk about religion with people. If you're certain about a position, when someone else tells you that position is even mildly wrong, they must be wrong. You have to be right. You know it for sure. I mean,
but what's interesting to me is, in studying, say, I studied Martin Luther and some of those, I thought, some of that I can't buy, but some of it I can translate it into a very sane psychology.
Okay.
And it makes sense. Now, whether Luther would agree with the way I'm putting it is another matter. But I think he was trying to solve a problem that exists in the psychological realm.
Right.
That's something that, in many ways, is responsible for a lot of bloodshed, torture, and other things that the founding fathers of the United States knew about.
Yes.
Which is why they made freedom of the press the very first and of our fundamental rights in the Constitution of the First Amendment.
Good point. That's a very good point. That was a major development.
Right. Yeah, because this
in our Constitution.
Now that you bring it up, it's really important. Like this sort of communication, and like when you think about modern day science communication, like the idea that some people still believe evolution is still not accepted. I mean, this is what I hear really often, but it's accepted by the majority of the scientific community. This is what the National History Museum, the Smithsonian Museum. This is what they have on display. This is the facts.
Oh yeah.
But it's kind of hit that communication barrier, I believe. Like for myself personally, it wasn't until I got out of high school that I heard anything about the facts of evolution. It sort of ran into this barrier of the instructors and the parents not communicating the information. Maybe they didn't know it themselves.
It's a good point.
I'm willing to believe they didn't know it themselves.
Yeah. And some teachers, I think in the past at least, had to worry about their jobs.
True.
Now this has changed. In fact, I think I mentioned on this program, I had a theology teacher who was a staunch evolutionist. He didn't take that passage there in Genesis.
Right.
I mean, to be literal statement. He says this is literature of that time.
That falls out into the concept of zeitgeist or worldview.
I didn't hear what you said. Say that again, would you?
That falls under the concept of zeitgeist or worldview. And for a lot of people, especially now, in the age of our transforming society, a lot of people are psychologically incapable of accepting the facts that other people can demonstrate to be true because it's against their personal beliefs. an interesting book in that. It's called Everybody Lies. And he deals with the fact that a lot of people will lie, especially to themselves, about certain factors, like whether or not the Bible is inerrant, or the fact that many of the sacred texts of the world are described things that never existed and could not exist.
Well, it's hard to know. It's one thing to say somebody lies to themselves. It's another thing to say, well, they just see it differently from me.
Right.
I mean, in that sense, we've all corrected our views on certain things. That doesn't mean I'm lying to myself necessarily. It means I just saw it that way, and that's different from lying. Because if I saw it right and I still continued to say the other thing, that would be a lie.
Right.
But if I see it a certain way, I'm not lying. I'm just finite and limited, and I'm learning.
Right.
What I'm talking about is
Go ahead.
what I'm talking about is deliberate, meaningful. I do not accept that because my zeitgeist says that such things cannot exist. So these are deliberate, chosen positions that are unmovable. There's a member of Family Research Council or something like that that's flat out said, if I found in the Bible 2 + 2 = 5, I would accept it unerringly.
Well, we're going to have to deal with that. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Charles. That's a good point. We'll have to deal with that in another program. If you don't mind, bring it up next time, because we got to go ahead with what we've planned to do also for this program.
Yes.
But that's a good point that you brought up. Real good. And what we want to point out is, we mentioned counseling can sometimes become effective if it's approached the way a ball player patiently strives to improve his own performance.
Yeah.
In other words, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Charles, we're going to let you go now. Thank you for calling.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
So when a ball comes into your field and you've got to catch it, you might miss it.
All right.
Okay, then you've got to learn from your mistakes. And that's the way in a discussion. An idea might come at you and you might miss it. and you have to find a way to, maybe the next time, throw me another pitch, see if I catch it next time. And so we often profit, if you're a ball player, from listening to the coach.
Right.
And then after a while, we learn to coach each other. And then we learn to coach ourselves, so that we try to improve our thinking and our feelings, so that we can say we're a good thinker and rational, but we're not very sensitive to other people.
Right.
Well, then somebody can say, look, if you're a good thinker, you've got to learn to think the way other people are thinking, not just your own way.
Absolutely. And I definitely think it goes along with that sort of progression that you laid out there. Because I don't expect someone to just come up and suddenly start coaching themselves about how to, be sympathetic or empathetic with another in conversation. It's good to start at the beginning, that listen to the coach, and then you can teach each other, then you can teach yourself. It's definitely something you work at. I don't think it's just...
And happen automatically,
Right. Yeah, especially in the sense of conversation that we've kind of ended up at. And this is one thing I find really interesting. Our culture sort of evolved faster than we have. So we've kind of come to this sort of place where we don't really have the equipment to deal with it, I think.
I got you.
We've got that basic thing that those organisms share that are communal, that deal with each other on a daily basis, that need each other for survival.
Sure.
But Homo sapiens have only been around 2 million years, I want to say it is.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of this thing that we have to learn to deal with.
Yeah, sure. Still in the process.
Right.
I'm still learning to drive. In fact, I had a friend moved here from Texas to Tennessee, and she said, here's a direct way, I'm having to learn to drive again because she's in all these hills, and in Texas it was pretty flat.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a learning experience for her.
I've been to Texas. It's much easier here than it is there. The roadways over there, it's crazy. But I understand that sort of thing. It's kind of like what you're used to. I wonder if this sort of counseling or this sort of empathy, maybe not empathy, but this sort of understanding of the other person's point of view changes from culture to culture. So like, I may not be able to put myself into your point of view if, say, you're from Canada.
Another culture, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you have to work at it.
Right.
You have to. Well, that's what we do in courses. And say you're taking a course in anthropology.
Right.
Well, you actually take a course to try to understand another culture.
Yeah, and it's. You mentioned anthropology. It's funny. I just finished a course in cultural anthropology, and it was. That's why I questioned my sort of ability to understand someone else's point of view on something. And
I like that.
Right. It's like there's a culture in South America that they hold to this sort of traditional beliefs of like a shaman healing, but they incorporate modern medicines with it. So they go to the shaman who does his ritual, and he ends it with a blessing because it's Catholic in the area. So they've got the shaman still. They mix it with Catholicism.
You got three things there.
Right, but then they'll give him a shot. So this sort of, I would, me looking at it, I can't see, I could understand.
Some doctors have not learned this yet.
Right.
They don't know the difference sometimes between being a machine and a doctor.
Right.
A doctor's got to learn empathy. Some are slow to learn it.
Okay, and we've got another phone call here.
Let's see. We've got a phone call.
Hello, caller. Do you have a name or nickname you can give us?
Well, hello, yes. This is Faithless Forest. I'm watching the show, and I heard you talking about trying to get into the heads of other cultures.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had that experience real strongly when I took a class in college called The History of Theater. And in that class, they had us read a Greek play. It's called Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the King. And I'll summarize it, that it's a play that takes place in real time, and Oedipus is the king of Thebes, and he discovers something terrible about himself. And at the end of the play, let's call it the narrator of the play, says something to the effect, "Never call a man happy until he is dead." And when I read that the first time, it's like, oh my goodness, this is pretty ghastly. But then I'm stammering here because I'm trying to recreate the fact that as I thought about it more, I felt then this sense of surprise that, I get it now. That the play began with Oedipus, with the king, everything was going well for him, and everyone would think of him as a happy man. But so long as he drew breath, there was opportunity to lose all that. So it was a very sort of pessimistic outlook. But there's another aspect to it that makes sense to talk about as well. This has to do with getting into the head of other cultures. And that is that for the Greeks, whenever a god intervened in your life, it usually didn't turn out well for you. And in a way, they recognized that.
Yeah.
Now, that's something that's very different from the Judeo-Christian thing.
Yes.
Because we always hear people talking about how, God, cured my aunt of cancer and this and that. You don't hear many people saying, well, God God, caused me a great tragedy today. You just don't hear that often. Now, what you will hear is, television preachers saying how God is bringing tragedies to cities because of something that the people in those cities do. You don't hear television preachers talking about how God brings tragedy to their life, though.
To their personal life, yes.
Right. So that's my little insight about another culture that I got from my history of theater class and reading some Greek plays. I'm going to let you go because I see it's winding down and you haven't done your mid-program break. I'll be anxious to hear that. Say goodbye now.
Okay. Thanks for reminding us. This is our mid-program break.
Yeah, okay, so let's see.
There we are, right here.
Oh, yeah, so in case you're just tuning in, this is a Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Freethought Forum is funded jointly by both of these and individual contributions as well. We want to thank them for their substantial funding for the show.
And we are live every Wednesday from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in Knoxville. And this is a cable channel, 194, I guess. And CTV on Knox.org. Let me do that again. It's CTV Knox.org.
Yeah, and today's show is live, and you can call in on the number on the screen there.
Yeah.
And speak with us. We're going to take a short break, and we've got some informative videos about our sponsors for you.
Okay, do we have any?
Yeah, we've got some videos.
Okay, let's get them. Are they there?
If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable? Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org.
We're back. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets one or more times a week, and meetings for fun and conversation, food, and so forth. Find us online at knoxvilleatheist.org, knoxvilleatheist.org. Mm-hmm. The purpose of ASK is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, right, and agnostics and free thinkers and other like-minded persons who are for rational inquiry. Mm-hmm. And our regular Tuesday meeting is 5:30 p.m. at Flats and Taps, and that's 7403 Kingston Pike here in Knoxville.
Right, and the Rationalists of East Tennessee will also be participating in Bible trivia. That's going to be on June 7th at Fort Sanders Yacht Club. It's at 6:30, and it's going to be raising money for ending hunger. And they're encouraging Christian teams to participate. That way, there's that feedback both ways.
Okay.
So, and the Rationalists of East Tennessee Skeptic Book Club for June 10th is going to be about rebalancing society, radical renewal beyond left, right, and center.
That's good. Yeah, communicating with each other, different sides. That's good.
Right.
Okay, well, so the public is invited to participate. You need not have read the book or to attend, but that might help. Visit rationalist.org to find the rest of the calendar of books and joining us for our location in Books A Million. That's 8513 Kingston Pike, Knoxville, Tennessee. That's a bookstore, Books A Million.
Perfect place.
Okay, back to the program, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see.
Okay, we were saying other people can help us by to gain more insight and into our feelings and our attitudes and our behavior, and that encouraging one another to become more comfortable with being scrupulous in our consistency and our honest inquiry and our honest self-understanding and in our relationship with other people. We can all improve our relationship with other people in certain areas, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely.
I worked in a restaurant for my dad for many years, and I had to learn, if you don't feel good, you smile anyhow, because people come in and expect service.
Right.
And they don't come to listen to me complain about my bellyache or whatever.
Right. Having experience in that myself, I can tell you it's definitely it happens. I mean, you wouldn't expect it to, but it sure does. And it's interesting that you talk about that, because in that sort of environment, you're conveying a different message than what you're actually feeling, and so you're almost like putting a cloak over that sort of ability.
Well, I discovered that if I smile early at 6 in the morning, I had to do this before school. They would smile back at 6:15 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I learned to enjoy the experience. My thinking was, well, I got to be here anyhow.
Right.
And I was a hedonist. That's just a Greek word for pleasure. And I didn't know that it was a Greek word then. I was only about 15. But I learned that by smiling and being friendly, I get nice jokes at 6:15 in the morning, or nice comments from people, because they want to feel good too.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'd get the opposite reaction had you been coming grumpy.
Oh yeah, well yeah, who wants to be around a grumpy person?
Right.
How are you today? Oh, Okay, what's next?
You're not getting anywhere with that.
Yeah, now if you go to a doctor, you do want to tell your complaints. That's why he gets paid.
Right.
And it's his job to listen carefully.
Right, absolutely. And he'll be the one trying to understand what you're going through in that situation.
Yeah, that's his job, and he can interpret that as to what he can do. And in fact, all professions need to have good listeners. If you got a mechanic coming in or an electrician coming in, they have to understand what the problem is before they can fix it.
Right.
And that means they have to listen to you and have to listen to the machinery or whatever, pay attention, to learn from. So
I feel like, unfortunately, that's not always the case with what we have. I think we'd get along a lot better if it were, for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe listening skills is something they should offer up as just a basic course.
Yeah, but when we go to a dentist, we want the dentist to be very sensitive and find out what the problem is before he starts drilling.
Oh, absolutely.
So now, I mentioned earlier that we also learn to coach ourselves, but we learn how to do that by being in a world in which we hear coaching going on.
Yeah, and that sort of the progression that you mentioned earlier.
And we want a good coach. When I was learning to drive, I knew I didn't know how to drive.
Right.
You ever been with a kid who's learning to drive and says, well, I know how to do all this? It makes you feel nervous because they don't know all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a stark contrast of like I don't know if everyone remembers their first time driving on a large road, but I remember being white-knuckled on the interstate and just for an hour just gripped as tightly as I could.
And that's probably sensible at that age.
Right.
Because you could pay heavy consequences the rest of your life.
Right, so if I got in the car with a kid who's, I know how to do this, that's fine. I'm thinking back to my own perspective of it, and I'm like, this does not make sense. I don't know if I
you want to
trust.
say there's a service station. I need to go to the bathroom. What you really mean is you want to get out of that car.
Right, absolutely.
So, I guess a counselor or a friend, and most of our counseling comes from friends, becomes our own. Helps us to become our own coach. Because sometimes we don't have somebody with us, and so when you coach yourself, you're partly borrowing what you've already heard other people say, and you say, well, yeah, that makes sense, and then you reflect on it. And then we carry on conversations in our heads with other people.
Right.
And we coach each other. A sensitive and rational friend can help us to consider better approaches, help us to enjoy life better, make cogent decisions, and learning how to foresee possible consequences, both for danger or for good opportunities that we hadn't thought of. And that's why we need friends and good relatives.
Right, and there's good relationships between them.
Yeah.
And even if it's just, you're of course avoiding the negative happenings to yourself, but you also want to avoid, the sort of potential harm to the other person.
Oh, yeah. I got you.
I think that's a large part of it. And when you're talking about coaching yourself, it makes me think of, have you ever listened to anything with Sam Harris talks, where he was one of the Four Horsemen, him, Dennett, who else we have? We had Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. You had...
Richard Dawkins,
and then, I'm leaving out the most important, Christopher Hitchens.
Uh-huh.
I almost forgot him. But when he talks about it, this sort of being aware of like your own situation, and it's kind of a weird thing to do, to not think this is all happening to me, but sort of think of yourself as an individual when you go to self-coach.
Yeah, it's almost as if you're another person talking about another person.
Right, and to do that, it feels odd at first. It really does, but it's really useful. I've found.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because in other words, you become another person to look at you at a different angle.
Right.
That's an art.
Yes, it is definitely something you have to develop, like you said.
Well, would you agree that it's important to learn to associate, and that's why it's important to teach children how to make good friends with people who are nice people. Because they can, bad kids can do harm to good kids by misleading them into bad things. And then you try to get to the kid that's causing a lot of trouble and help him to see there's a better way for him too.
Right. And that's definitely something we're going to have to discuss in the future, but it's actually, it's time to start wrapping things up. So if you'll get out your pen and paper, this has been a Freethought Forum program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee.
And you can give us feedback by email, freethoughtforum@yahoo.com, or on the Facebook page, Freethought, that's one word, Freethought Forum, another word, Knoxville.
And then you and your friends, you can see the show on Wednesday evenings. We're on from 6:30 to 7:30. That's Eastern time in this Knoxville station, and online at ctvknox.org.
Okay, and you do the next.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank you, our guys in the back of the house, for technical support, and the staff of CTV Knoxville and all our viewers. And those who identify with no religion are the fastest growing religious groups in America. It's funny to call it that, but right here in East Tennessee, the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee are places you can find fellowship and fun. And we just really want you to remember that you are not alone.
Yes. So this is, remember, the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. We want to welcome you back next time.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.